Almost every one of us knows someone or knows of someone at a very minimum who looked at the conditions of their own country and then they made a decision. They looked around and they saw what was happening and they saw where the opportunity was. And most importantly, they saw where the opportunity was not. And so then they left and they went somewhere else. And in many cases, these people, they didn't abandon their country. They went where the resources were. They went where the opportunity was rising and they built community wherever they landed. And then they sent resources back home. This is an entire strategy, y'all, executed by people who had far less than what we have. And if you're a Black American, you probably never thought that we would be those people. And we never thought that we would be those people because for many of them, they were coming here. They were coming to America, right? America was the destination. But today I want to talk to you about what happens when that stops being true. And I want to talk about why we, of all people in this country, cannot afford to be the last ones to notice the shift. Now, I'm not going to tell you that America collapsed last Tuesday and we just didn't get the notice. What I am going to say is very clearly that America and the West broadly are declining. And I think we should talk about it. And I think we should talk about how it affects our community. I want to walk through the numbers. Y'all don't know. I can be very emotional, very passionate, and I like to bring it back to data and the facts because it's like my safe space. Okay. So if you are new here, welcome. My name is Jice Johnson. I am a business strategist and an economic developer. And if you're returning, welcome back. Now, on this channel, we talk about all things business, leadership, and global politics. These are not three separate subjects, my friends. They are joined at the hip and they do govern our daily lives. So I want you to stick with me to the end. I'm going to talk about what the dollar is actually doing. I'm going to talk about what our wars have actually produced and what our debt actually looks like right now. And I want to talk about what those numbers mean for the Black community specifically. So, as I get started, I want to just lay some context, right? I want to start with something that we all grew up with. Even if you're not American, you grew up with this, right? And that is the concept of America. America being the greatest country on earth, right? Land of the free, home of the fucking brave. I'm sorry, y'all. So, side note, somebody in the comments asked me, do I have to curse? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. 100% I do. This is how I talk. At any rate, America was the land of opportunity, right? And everyone wants to come to America, to come to our, our gold paved streets. Greatest country on earth, strongest military, right? Just awesome. Okay. Here's the thing about the American story. Here's the thing about the story that America tells itself, right? And I don't want to make it seem like that maybe this was never true. I don't know. I think that's perspective because as a Black American, I don't know if I feel like it was ever true. But for a white American or for other immigrants that were coming here and were able to utilize the resources and access opportunity, it is possibly true that for some, for a time, America was the greatest country on earth. For sure, America did have a period of time where it was building out a very robust middle class. And there are some Black Americans that did get a chance to participate in that. My family is one of them. I'm always very clear about where I feel like I come from. I grew up middle class. And so there was a period of time that maybe that story was true. For sure, there was a period of time where America sat on top of the global world order. And that just wasn't contested. I think that's what everyone pretty much agreed, right? And at that time, the story matched those conditions, but the conditions have changed and the story has not changed. And that's where it gets a little bit interesting for us because when the story stops matching the conditions, the story then stops becoming a description and it actually starts becoming something else. It becomes a tool. It becomes this thing that keeps everyone looking in one direction when the actual movement is happening somewhere else. That's the tool is propaganda. But what's interesting about it is that it's not just propaganda aimed at Black folks, right? The propaganda is aimed at all Americans. The propaganda might even be aimed globally, but for sure, the propaganda is aimed at all Americans. Every single person in this country inherits this same story, right? Your white neighbors, your coworkers, the people who write the news, we all get this story about how great America is, how powerful America is, how much we are running the world. We are a global power. I do think, though, that this narrative costs Black Americans more, and it costs us more because of where we sit and how we're postured inside of this country. And so, as we dig into the rest of this information, I'm going to continue to dig in on that space, right? The posturing of where the Black community sits in all of this. So I want to start with the dollar. I want to start with the dollar because that's actually where American power lives. It's not the military, right? People think it's the military. I thought it was the military when I joined the military. The military is the enforcement arm, the dollar is the power. And so the dollar is still the most powerful currency in the world, right? That currently is true. It's the currency that most countries in the world still trade with. It is the currency that the central banks are still holding. It is also still what oil is priced in, and so the dollar has not collapsed. But I want to talk about it because the dollar is collapsing, right? That position is eroding. It's eroding in real time, and it's been eroding for a long time. And right now, I think what we're seeing is this erosion is accelerating. And so when we're thinking about preparation and the things that we need to do to accommodate for this change and this acceleration, I think the understanding that the erosion is accelerating is going to be really pivotal for us to like wrap our mind around in terms of what this means for us right now today. But let's go back a little. In 2001, the dollar made up about 72% of the global central bank reserves. So that was 2001. Today, that number is around 57%. That is the lowest that it's been since 1995. It's not quite at a crash level, so they say, but this 15-point slide over the last 25 years, which in the world of like reserve currencies is actually pretty big. Reserve currencies, they really don't move fast. And so when they move, it means that something structural is happening underneath, right? So we know for sure and have known for a few decades that something is going on. In addition to that, it's not just what the central banks are holding, it's also who is willing to hold or buy our debt. So foreign investors used to own more than half of the US Treasury market. Today, they own about 30%. So this is a signaling that the rest of the world is very quietly, very steadily moving away from their American dependency, right? So let's talk about the oil because that's a huge part of the dollar, the petrodollar, right? This is where I think it gets a little interesting because there has been an arrangement for about the last 50 plus years, right? Where the world's oil trade is running through the dollar. Now, Saudi Arabia, right? They sell oil. That oil is priced in dollars. The dollars come back into US treasuries. That arrangement has been happening for some time. But what people often maybe get a little confused about is that it is not a formal signed agreement. It is an understanding. It is a relationship. It was maintained by military protection and by mutual interest, but it is not a contract. And I think that that is really important for us to understand because an understanding is more fragile than a contract, right? Like a contract, you have to break. An understanding, you can just stop honoring quietly or not quietly, gradually or not gradually, right? You don't have to honor an understanding. And so what's happening over in Saudi Arabia has been quite interesting. They actually joined Mbridge, which is a cross-border digital currency platform built with the central banks of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. Mbridge is, as it's currently built, does not plan to support dollar payments. A payment system built by the countries that represent the rising share of the world economy. They were joined by the country that anchored the entire oil for dollars arrangement. And they're planning to use a system that doesn't route through the dollar at all. This is not like, this is big for us. This is not a country that is talking about de-dollarization. This is a country that is building the pipeline for a world that does not need the dollar. The petrodollar arrangement was the last serious structure holding dollar dominance in place after we came off the gold standard back in the 70s. So it's not, when we're talking about the world order changing, and when we're talking about the de-dollarization, and we're talking about countries that are reducing or removing their reliance on the United States, this is not in theory. They are laying the groundwork for this very clearly to route around the need for America, the need for America's military power, the need for America's economic power. And while we're talking about a lot of things that are happening, we speak about the economy like it's the stock market. And that's not the case. These are not synonymous. The stock market is a part of the economy. It is not the economy. So hold on to that, right? Because we're going to build on that. I want to talk next about sanctions, because also America is a fucking bully. And people are tired of it. So if the dollar was power, sanctions are how that power gets used. So if you're not familiar what a sanction is, right? It's basically America saying that we control access to the global financial system. And if we are sanctioning you, we are cutting you out of it. And so then for decades, this has been devastating, right? Because if you have nowhere to go to trade globally, if no one on the global stage will trade with you, you are going to be economically oppressed. This is what the United States has done around the globe for decades, has wielded this power, right? Cutting off people from being able to access the dollar system and cutting them off from the global economy or the world economy, period. And people are tired of it. They're sick of this shit, quite frankly. Um, and there's a lot to, like, again, there's an acceleration, and I feel like I don't have time to get into a lot of the key things that have sped this up. But you could start looking into it, like what types of sanctions have sped up the erosion of dollar dominance, right? But I want to give you a couple of examples, just so that we can walk through them. There's a lot of examples. There's a lot of examples. So let's start with China. As one of, I'm gonna give us three. Let's start with China. So first, the US put historic tariffs on China. China's response was rare earths. China controls the processing of the rare earth minerals that go into essentially every piece of advanced technology in this country. And that included the technology that's in our weapon systems. And it includes, it pretty much includes all the technology. So when China signaled that it was going to restrict the rare earths, the United States basically backed down from its own tariffs almost immediately because we just can't afford to do that. Now, there is a man, I'm going to reference him multiple times. And if you're not familiar with this name, I personally think you should get familiar with him. I'm familiar with him in the world of the economic development. But Jeffrey Sachs, who is a professor at Columbia, what he said was that the United States learned that it can't impose its will on China. The rare earths threat by itself was enough to cause the U.S. to reconsider. So the economic pressure that was going in one direction, right? And then the country that folded on this, game of chicken was ours. We folded. The Americans did. So in more recent news, in very recent news, and the truth of this, the rare earths news is not far off, but in very recent news, as in like last week or this week, Canada. This is one that is literally happening right now, right? The United States and Canada, they were negotiating a trade deal. And then in the final hours, US negotiators added a demand that Canada surrender its right to make trade deals with other nations. So again, it's this constant battle to try to control global trade. It's trying to tell Canada, a sovereign nation, who it can and can't trade with. And the US has done this through sanctions for decades. Canada just walked away from the table. 50% tariffs are now scheduled to hit Canadian, did hit Canadian goods on August the 22nd. And I'm recording this on the 25th. Canada announced a dollar for dollar retaliation starting September 8th. When Prime Minister Carney was asked by his press if he sounded like a man or why he sounded like a man going to war, he said, "You're at war when you get attacked, and we got attacked." So that's Canada. That's our closest ally, right? Our largest trading partner, the country that sends 72% of its exports here. That country decided that being told who it can and cannot trade with was worse than 50% tariffs. And they walked away from the deal. Now, back in March, when the U.S. moved to ease our own sanctions on Russian oil, Canada declined to follow. It kept its sanctions in place, right? And so that was at that time, that was like an ally deciding very independently that it no longer wanted to take its cues from Washington, who gets sanctioned. So Canada has decided, like, just to button this, Canada has decided that it is making its own economic decisions, and it is not following or falling in line with the US. The next one, the last example of this, because all of these are recent examples, right? I want to talk about Burkina Faso. Y'all know I love Burkina Faso. And then I do feel like this is like one of the ones that should mean the most to us as Black Americans, right? So the US wanted Burkina Faso to accept our deportees. Not just like the deportees from Burkina Faso. It wanted Burkina Faso to accept third country nationals, right? People that don't have a connection to Burkina Faso at all, as a part of a program where the US had been offering money and preferential visa processing to African nations who were willing to take them. So, of course, a lot of African nations did accept to take these deportees, but Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Traore, they said no, right? The foreign minister called the proposal indecent. That's indecent, and said that Burkina Faso is a place of dignity and it's a destination. It's not a place of expulsion. So it set its terms for the narrative and the story about Burkina Faso that Burkina Faso has decided it wants to say. So then the U.S. suspended visa services at its embassy in Ouagadougou and made Burkina-based citizens travel to a whole nother country to apply. So the foreign minister named that for what it was and asked directly whether it was blackmail. Still, Burkina Faso did not fold under this situation. Not only did Burkina Faso not fold, they awarded a new mining license to a Russian company that is currently under U.S. sanctions. So when the U.S. put Burkina Faso on a travel ban list, Burkina Faso banned U.S. nationals right back. So if you want to go to Burkina Faso and you can't, it's because the U.S. tried to tell Burkina Faso how to behave, who to take, and tried to bribe Burkina Faso with some dollars to do something that they did not want to do. And then Burkina Faso doubled down not only on that, but essentially hit the U.S. right back the same way that Canada just said. The U.S. is hitting Canada with tariffs. Canada said, boom, no problem. Dollar for dollar tariffs are coming back on you. And if you go back and listen to what the Prime Minister of Canada was talking about, they are now just devising a plan in order to secure their businesses. They basically said, I went and listened to the whole press conference. The Prime Minister said that they are putting in a plan in place to ensure, to the best of their ability, that they are going to have the back of their small businesses because they are one of our largest trading partners. But they will no longer back down to do what the U.S. wants them to do from an economic perspective. Burkina Faso does not have the standing that Canada has. Y'all have to understand, Burkina Faso is reportedly one of the poorest countries on earth. It is sitting under significant Western and global pressure. They are calling Burkina Faso a human rights situation right now, whatever you want to call that. But they are calling Burkina Faso a human rights issue, or I don't know why the words are leaving me, but y'all know what I'm saying. They are saying that Burkina Faso has human rights violations. That's the word I was looking for. That Burkina Faso right now it has human rights violations. And so then the U.S. basically put a ban on Burkina Bay people traveling to the U.S. And Burkina Faso was like, whatever, the U.S. can't travel here. Burkina Faso don't care. They didn't already kicked out France and told France, we don't need you, don't come back. And then they cut diplomatic ties with France. That's what I'm saying. It's not just the U.S., it's a Western thing, but we're going to focus on the U.S. But these are significant things, right? When Burkina Faso decidedly goes to do business with a U.S. sanctioned country like Russia, that is telling the U.S. we actually don't care about your sanctions. And you're not going to control who we operate with. So you have China, you have Canada, you have Burkina Faso. And the reason why I'm using these as examples is because all of these countries sit in different places on the global stage. These are calculations that would not have been available just a decade ago, certainly not 2 decades ago, right? Like, they are available right now because there are other places to go. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for sure, there was like nowhere to go. But over the last couple of decades, this is what I mean by this erosion. Over the last couple of decades, they have been building other places to go. Russia is there. China is there. The Alliance of the Sahel States is there. The exit, like the off-ramps, right? They now exist when they simply did not before. Now, smaller nations may still bend, right? And we have to be honest about that. Smaller nations may not feel like they have all these pieces in place. Plenty of countries took those deportees to get the dollars and to have visa options, right? But you have to look at where each of these countries is sitting and the goals and the direction for those countries. But also look at the ones who didn't fold and where they're going, right? So while on the global Western stage, I should say, Burkina Faso is getting the rap that it is in terms of human rights violations. And I don't know if they have human rights violations or not. I don't know. What I do know is that if you're listening to African media, that's not the story. So whose narrative, right? So there's a global realignment that's happening, and I'm gonna keep going but I'm going to bring it back to how this affects us, the Black community. So let's stick with me. The next thing I want to talk about is the military, right? So we've talked about the money. Let's talk about the military, because this is essentially the other leg that like American dominance stands on, right? Stands on the dollar, stands on the military. So the military is I say this as a ex-soldier, right? I'm a veteran, a wartime veteran. I went to Operation Iraqi Freedom. So Afghanistan and Iraq. I really don't like calling it Iraq because that's how we say it, but Afghanistan and Iraq. Um, these wars, y'all, have costs. It depends on what source you're looking at, and it also depends on like what they're calculating when they're calculating the cost of the war. But the most conservative accounting, as almost like just purely actual direct war costs, at least $5 trillion. That's on the conservative side. If you start adding in things like veterans care, interest on the money that we borrowed for the war, homeland security spending, right? Like all of these, long tail obligations, the number for post 9/11 military spending will run us upward of like $21 trillion. What did $21 trillion buy us? In Afghanistan, after 20 years of occupation, right, it literally ended with the Taliban walking right back on into Kabul in 2021. 20 years, $2 trillion minimum on that aspect of the war, right? On the conservative side, and the government that we spent 2 decades fighting against, right? Just rebuilt faster than the evacuation. It's wild work. In Iraq, where I spent my time, we didn't just fail to stabilize the region. The vacuum that we created is like where ISIS came from, right? So we generated the enemy, and then we spent another decade fighting them. You can't make this up. This is the incompetence of the US. This is mediocrity dressed up as very much undue meritocracy. We are not a meritocracy. This country is very mediocre. It's not just that America, like, it's not just that we've struggled to win our own wars, right? It's that we also increasingly can't deliver for the people who are fighting alongside of us either. So being an American ally in a conflict has stopped being like the guarantee that it used to be. And when countries are looking at if they want to go alongside of us as our allies in a military conflict, what we're seeing is that they don't. Like, they did that, and then now they don't want to do that. So then we have Iran, right? And that's of course where we are right now. As I'm recording this, we are in the middle of it. And so February 28th of this year, the US and Israel, they launched these airstrikes on Iran, and they assassinated the supreme leader, right? So then Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz, where a fifth of the world's oil moves, right? And now we are in February, we're in month 6. It doesn't even matter about like all of the ceasefires and all the talks from Islamabad that have failed. Like, we've imposed this naval blockade, all these memorandums of understanding. I mean, all of this stuff is going down, right? But at the end of the day, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And what's interesting, and this kind of goes back to like, not, first of all, what I hope is being conveyed through all of this, is that this goes back so much further than just this ridiculous ass president. So this is not just a President Trump situation. Now, the way he is making us look, though, is wild. Like, literally, the president announced that the Strait of Hormuz was American territory. Okay, I'm gonna just keep going. But I do want to drive home because I'm highly critical. I'm not even sure if you could really call like being critical of this administration, because this administration is so comical that like, if we weren't talking about people's actual lives, if we weren't talking about our lives, our livelihood, if we weren't talking about these things and we were just taking this at face value, this would almost be comical, because this administration is so full of shit. Anyway, all right, let me go back to where my notes were. So yeah, so I do want to let me jump back to where I was. Sorry about that. So yeah. So basically, the Strait of Hormuz closed, right? As I was saying, 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. It is shut down. We've had all these conversations. Clearly, the Strait of Hormuz is not American territory. But meanwhile, right, what we do have is we have gas that is averaging $4.11. This is up almost $1 from this time last year, and it's the highest August that's on record. So my point in saying all of this, right, my claim about American military power is that as long as nuclear weapons stay off the table, the United States is not meaningfully stronger or meaningfully more strategic than any of its adversaries. It's better funded. I don't think anybody would dispute that. We literally spend more than the next several countries combined, but money is not the same thing as capability, and capability is not the same thing as strategy. And what we have is the ability to destroy, but we have failed at demonstrating that we have the ability to achieve an outcome. So destruction, that's easy, right? Like being able to be strategic and actually getting to a diplomatic outcome that you want, or even a militaristic outcome that you want, right? That we have not proven that we can actually do that. And I think what we are seeing now is that a significant amount of other countries from a global perspective, they have figured that out. So now folks are starting to change their calculations because the propaganda machine is starting to fall apart. Right. And so, and I don't think, and I'll say this, right? I don't think it's that anyone thinks that they can necessarily just beat America in a straight up fight. Right. I mean, this is why I'm saying strategy. We have watched America win every like direct engagement, but still lose the war for the last several wars, actually. So our military power is nuanced, because it's not that the firepower doesn't exist. Well, the firepower might not after this war with Iran, but it's not that the firepower doesn't exist. It's that we don't have the ability to reach militaristic or diplomatic outcomes at this point. And the world knows that. So let's move on to the next thing, right? While all of that is happening out there, what's happening in the US? As of last week, the United States national debt crossed $40 trillion. $40 trillion. In January of 2017, it was under $20 trillion. So it doubled in under a decade. It's accelerating because we went from 39 trillion to 40 trillion in 5 months. I have been talking about this from the beginning. I literally have some viral Instagram video that went viral because I was trying to tell Black Americans that the US is in a debt death spiral. It's going to get worse. There's no feasible possibility or outcome in which it gets better. At least it doesn't get better before it gets worse. The number that actually matters here is the interest. And this is what I mean by debt death spiral, right? It's because the interest is starting to outweigh, it's outweighing the income essentially that we're bringing in, right? So the interest on the debt, right? Just the interest, not the principal and the interest, just the interest on the debt that we already owe now runs $1.1 trillion a year. That is more than what we spend on our entire military. It's the second largest line item in the federal budget, only behind Social Security. That's where we're spending our money, on the interest of the national debt. We are borrowing about $6 billion a day, and over half of that is interest on debt that we already have. We are borrowing money to pay the interest on our borrowing, okay? So now, I'm not the financial guru, but I want you to think about what it is that I'm saying. You have a credit card. You have a principal and an interest payment. You need to make a principal and an interest payment. You don't have enough money to make a principal and an interest payment. You borrow money from someone else in order to not pay the principal and the interest, only to pay the interest. This is the state of our country. So the bond market has taken notice, and investors are demanding higher rates to keep lending to us. This is I almost think about it like a loan shark. Not that the other countries are really, not that investors are necessarily acting that way, but think about it like that, right? I have this debt, I need to pay this debt, so I'm gonna go borrow this money, and you're going to get charged more to borrow it because we actually don't trust you, right? You need to borrow at a premium, which means higher rates on everything, higher rates on mortgages, higher rates on cars, higher rates on credit cards, right? This is what's happening. When I'm saying that we need to pay more attention to what's going on globally, it's why. We think that this is something that's going on out there, and it's not. It's all connected. The rates going up like this translate into your higher mortgage payment, into your higher car loan, into your higher interest rate on your personal credit card. It's eating away at your pocket and what you can afford for your family. Reportedly, there are only 3 ways out of this: raise taxes, cut spending, or some combination, right? The Congressional Budget Office says this, right? There's no way that we grow out of this trajectory. And in the past, and maybe at some point I looked into this, but I would like to break it down, I think, a little bit better in some more layman terms for us. I always try to make sure that anyone who is paying attention can follow along. But we've been in dire financial situations before, and the way that the US has eased that has been literally off the backs of the most vulnerable of us, right? It has been off the backs of the everyday people. And so at a high level, what I'll say is the last time that the US basically tried to ease this enormous amount of debt, the everyday average person lost 40% of their portfolio. I'll come back to that at some point. Not today, but I'll come back to that at some point. So when there's something coming, there's things that are shifting. And we should ask ourselves, whose back is that going to land on? And I think that we're going to know the answer, right? When America has to absorb this economic pain, that pain gets distributed downward. And it also gets distributed unevenly. It comes through cuts to programs that hold people that hold up people at the bottom, right? It comes through inflation, which is a tax on the people who don't own assets. It comes through interest rates that lock the working class people out of home ownership. And if you already own, a few houses or whatever, you're going to be just fine. So, I'm sorry, if y'all are new here, I don't edit my videos because I don't know how to edit. And I'm not learning right now. So walk with me because I'll be thinking in real time, right? But like what I'm saying is the dollar's global position is slipping. Hopefully, at this point, that's clear. And the tool that we use to enforce our economic will is essentially losing its bite. And the wars that we continuously start have cost us trillions and have produced nothing. And our debt has doubled in the last decade. And the interest rates now exceed our military budget. And the mechanism for absorbing all of that essentially runs directly through the people who have the least amount of cushion. So let's talk about I mentioned a few things. I mentioned Jeffrey Sachs, right? Earlier. And the thing is, first of all, I like Jeffrey Sachs overall. If you're a numbers and data person and you like the narrative that that goes along with it, you probably like Jeffrey Sachs as well. So if you've never looked into him, I suggest that you do. But it's not about him. It's not about him, right? I don't feel like we need a Columbia professor to back up what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying, I use Jeffrey Sachs for a reason because he actually has a very long track record of being right about where the global economy was heading, while mainstream was calling him an alarmist. And so he has a track record that I can appreciate. But what he says, what he's been saying are actually all around stages, like all over the world this year, last year, right? I think it's worth noting is that this is where there is some serious economic thinking has been put into what it is that I'm saying. One of the things he put out there at the Nishan Forum, that was this year. So there's a couple things that he talked about this year that I want to highlight. So Jeffrey Sachs, he said he put the responsibility for global tension squarely on the US. He said the United States still operates with a mentality of hegemony and global dominance in a world where that dominance is neither feasible nor desirable. Then at another event at Renmin University, I'm mentioning these so you can look them up if you want to go and listen to what he said, but he went further and he made it like, he put it in math, right? This was measured by purchasing power parity, which is like, we talk about purchasing power. And how that's measured, and then how that actually, how do you actually see purchasing power so that you can give it a real metric? Because it is a real metric, right? It just isn't the metric that the Black community was using to indicate wealth. But I'll leave that where it is. In purchasing power, he was talking about China's economy and how it is already about 30% larger than our economy. So again, this is why I didn't like the concept around the purchasing power, because we were trying to take a group inside of a country, but he's actually talking about the entire country, right? And like, what does it spend? So it includes all the things that purchasing power should include. And he's saying that China's economy is already 30% larger than ours. It's roughly about 40 trillion against 30 trillion, right? So that's already happening. But I think what's important here is, as he's been talking about, as he's been talking about this, he talks about, he's not calling this the rise of Asia, he's calling it the return of Asia. Because for most of the last 2,000 years, Asia was roughly 60% of the world economy and the world population. It's only been in roughly the last 250 years of Western dominance that we all treat as this sort of like natural order of the world. But he's saying it's really an anomaly. So we just so happen to be born inside of it, right? So it feels like this is what it is. And if you listen to Western propaganda, they will tell you that this is what it is. But really what he's saying is, if you want to span out a little bit and look at the last 2,000 years, right? This is a blip, and it's an anomaly. It is not the norm. So the way that we have been perceiving our position from a global perspective has been this way for a very short amount of time. And Jeffrey Sachs has been just as clear about Africa, right? He's been saying that African leaders, or he's been telling African leaders rather directly, that this is the window, that when this is the time, it's now. That unity is the requirement and that time is running out. His argument is that African countries following the development path that China took could be a high income continent within 40 years. 40 years. That's one generation, right? One generation within the lifetime of my children, God willing, right? Possibly yours, right? One generation. So here's the map, right? The rise is in Asia. That's already happened though. So America keeps positioning itself like it's on top, but Asia is on top. Asia's on top. The rise that is next, the rise that is ahead is Africa. What are we doing? What are we doing? We are being kept in a state of permanent distraction. Every single day, the American media is handing us another cycle about Trump and the Epstein class and about whatever the outrage of the fucking hour is. What are we doing? What are we doing? I feel like it's clear at this point that this country does not actually care about the vile and corrupt and sadistic. This is what they're built off of, right? This is what they're built off of. The country is built off of corruption and sadism. They don't have a moral ounce to them. So they're constantly producing this distracting narrative. And while we are standing here, the entire world is reorganizing itself. Payment systems are being built that do not touch the dollar. Trade blocks are forming. Countries are testing whether American pressure still works, and they're discovering that it doesn't. The whole architecture is being rearranged. We are literally in the middle of it. I told y'all I get passionate. We are in the middle of it because I want us to win, y'all. I want us to win. And I'd be listening to all this. I made a comment about EYL, but really I'd be trying not to get caught up in the bullshit. The main thing, if I had to say anything about EYL and all these false prophets of capitalism, is just that. They are false prophets of capitalism. They are a distraction. There is no possible way that individual wealth and success is going to equal widespread change. We're just not all going to get there. And that means your kids aren't going to get there, right? Like, we're spending our attention and our organizing energy and our outrage on trying to elevate our position on a ground that's losing. That's what I'm saying. That's what I've taken all this time in this long ass video to tell you. Like, we are swiping and we're outraged and we're outraged and we're outraged and we're sitting on our couch in outrage, wasting our attention and wasting our organizing energy. And we are trying to elevate ourselves within a system that is collapsing. So I want to talk about why it costs us more. And I want to bring this all home, right? Everybody in this country has inherited that myth that I said, that America is, the best, right? We hold we hold this specific position that makes us, that makes believing that we are sitting on top as Americans uniquely expensive, because we sit at the bottom of a hierarchy inside of this country while being told that the country itself is sitting on top of the world. And if you believe that this thing called America is permanent, right, and your entire strategy becomes climbing what you believe to be permanent, right, then all of what we are doing goes into positioning inside of this existing structure. We want better access. We want better representation. We want better seats. We want a bigger share of what is here. And I get that. I do. I get that. I don't feel like that's wrong. Like, with all that America has built off our backs, I don't feel like us wanting that is wrong. So I don't want to diminish that. I think that's what I want to say. I don't want to diminish that. But I do think that within these strategies, right, and the assumption underneath it, that assumption that this structure is going to stick around in order for us to even enjoy those riches that we are striving so hard to get, right? Like, can you imagine doing all this work to get to something and then discovering that what you thought you were getting to isn't even here no more? Because that's what's happening. So I do want to talk about one other cost that I do feel like keeps me up. And that is that we have these movements that from our own community that are actively arguing for us to cut ties with the continent of Africa. And I've talked about this before. I really don't get it. I do agree, or I get that, like, in the case for reparations, it makes sense. It has always made sense to me to develop a legal claim for reparations within America. That has always made sense for me. But arguing that, like, our lineage stops at the shores of America, or arguing that our connection to Africa is a distraction from what we're owed here, that's wild to me, right? Um, and strategically, I have a lot of questions. I keep saying that I believe, and obviously, I'm talking about FBA. I don't follow as closely as I used to ADOS, so I don't know where ADOS is sitting inside of this, like, broader conversation. Right? The way I remember it, ADOS came out of trying to establish a legal claim, and then FBA came as like an antithesis to this, and then it got like into this weird space, but ultimately FBA is louder and FBA is problematic. And I believe whether they got co-opted on purpose or not, I believe that movement is co-opted because strategically and on the timeline that we're on, it doesn't make sense for us to cut ties with the continent or to try to distance ourselves in that way, right? The American dollar, it still holds significant weight. That was something that I started with at the very top. I told y'all to pin it, right? Because the American dollar is collapsing. It hasn't collapsed, but it is losing its value, right? If you travel internationally, you may know that. Like, what it cost to go to Mexico last year ain't what it cost to go to Mexico this year. What it cost to go to Mexico 5 years ago ain't what it costs to go to Mexico this year, right? The dollar's losing its value. And if you're traveling, you might would see that. But the reality is that it's losing its value. It has not lost its value. This is the window. This is the window that Jeffrey Sachs is talking about, right? And Africa is where the growth is going to be over the next 40 to 80 years. So you can't be legacy minded. I don't care what you cannot be legacy minded and not be focusing in on what's happening globally. You cannot be. You cannot be. Africa is where the growth is happening. It's where the growth is going to be over the next 40 years. And the West is trying desperately to make sure that that's not the case. And I feel like I could talk about that later. Excuse me, because I don't know why I keep thinking I'm gonna make a 30-minute video, y'all. In my mind, I sit down and make a 30-minute video, and that's not what it turns out to be. So in my mind, this video is super long. In the YouTube world, maybe it's not. But in my mind, it's super long. So I'm gonna wrap it up. But the window is right now, right? Like the small amount of economic power that our community does hold can still be moved to where the opportunity is rising. And it can be moved at an exchange rate that will not be this favorable again. The exchange rate is definitely shifting. It's not shifting in our favor, but we still have time. And every year that we wait, that transfer is going to get more and more expensive. This is how currency works. Like, this is not in theory. I'm telling you what it is. We are being asked to choose right now whether we spend the last of our leverage inside of a declining system or whether we invest it in a rising one. And most of us don't even know that the choice is on the table because we only act like there's one table. I'm not asking for anybody to give up on building here. I think, this is the country of my birth, right? I'm not going to call it my home anymore. But this is the country of my birth. This is home for right now is where I'm at. But this is the country of my birth, right? This is my children are here, your children are here. The institutions that we have built, right? They're here. Things that are here, it matters. For a significant amount of us, our families are never going to leave. This is why I started by saying we all know someone who saw the writing on the wall and they made different choices. And if you're interested in content like this, if you have stayed through the end of this, maybe that someone is you, for you and your family. I'm asking for us to get strategic about securing what is next for our communities and for our families. That's really what I'm asking. We all know someone who has looked at the conditions of their country and they left to pursue better options. And it's not that they abandoned their country. They moved to where those resources were, where the opportunities existed, and they built community there. And then they moved the resources back home. This is what a diaspora strategy really looks like, right? And this is what people do when they understand that loyalty to a place and clear sight about that place are two different things. We should have clear sight about this place. We should have clear sight about what's happening. We should understand what's coming. I think that we should reconsider our position. I think, and I'll say this in my Baptist clothes, right? I think that we should reconsider our position. Migration has always been a thing. Like, even when we talk about how we got here, even if we want to look so far back that we say that we are foundational to this land, that's cool. Migration has always been a thing. We know that people have migrated around. Well, if you study history at all, people have migrated around, right? It has always been a thing. People in search of better from whatever, right? From natural disaster, from for resources, for more inhabitable spaces to call home. The people who saw their conditions clearly and moved, they weren't pessimists. They were the most hopeful people in the room, right? You're not going to uproot your life for a future that you don't believe in. The people who have migrated for better opportunity for their family were the most hopeful people in the room. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I believe in the power of Black people. So if any of this landed for you, take it to the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for joining me. Do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, share, and I will catch you on the next one.